Isaiah chapter 5, and we'd gotten down to verse 12. The section begins in verse 8 and goes through verse 23. We won't read all of that again, but it is an enumeration of their sins. And it's dealing with their covetousness and greed that's going to be punished by a famine. In verse 11, we saw a second woe being pronounced upon them, and it deals primarily in verse 11 with drinking alcoholic beverages, and also the idea of partying. They would get up for the purpose of drinking, and they would continue all day long drinking till at night they were drunk. That brings us to verse 12, where he states, "And the harp and the viol, the tabret and pipe and wine are in their feast, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands." This is still dealing with their drunken feast. And he is not only now in verse 11 talking about their drunkenness, but now then the musical instruments was a part of that drunken feast. The viol was a harp-like or guitar-like instrument, probably with 10 or 12 strings. The tabret would be a kettle drum out of hollowed out wood with leather that would be stretched across it. And so it would be used as a percussion instrument. It was used to drown out the cries of children as they were sacrificed to Moloch. If you read much of the Old Testament, especially during the days of the divided kingdom and the northern kingdom in particular, they took upon themselves the god of Moloch, and they would offer their children as sacrifices. They would burn them alive, basically. And to prevent hearing the cries of the child as he is being burned, they would use instruments. You're now, when you understand that, you see really the origin of mechanical instruments of music in worship. The origin of it goes back to idol worship, that it was being used to drown out the cries of children that were being sacrificed.
That's the first evidence we have of its use.
That's the background of mechanical instruments in worship. As far as it finding mechanical instruments, you can find it before that, but as far as it dealing with worship, and when I say worship, I'm not talking about worship of God. In this case, it's still worship, but it's a worship of idols. And that is the origin of it as far as worship is concerned, being used to drown out the cries of the children who are being sacrificed on the altar. Mm-hmm.
Up on the left side of the stage, there's a glass house, and the drums
It would probably be to muffle the drums.
Surely he's wearing earbuds.
And very possibly he is wearing earplugs that would be able to hear what is going on. But anytime you see instruments of music in a religious setting, you can almost be assured that it's going to be drowning out any singing that is taking place. Now then, with professional groups, even if you go to a concert, many times the instruments are drowning out any singing. You can't understand and hear the singing because of the instruments. Now, that's not all. I was about to say that's not always the case in relationship to professionals, but because they can tune things and they have the microphone system and the speaker system that can change things up. But generally speaking, you wouldn't hear anything other than the band if you had one in here. Same thing with piano. I remember someone trying to record a song and they were playing a piano as well. You never heard the singing because the piano drowned it out when he recorded it. That's just the nature of instruments. Okay, Dale.
Can't they put individual microphone, mics or whatever on people so that the volume and the other word overcome the other stuff where they can make the thing work right? You know what I mean? Can't they have individual mics on people or amplifiers?
We have individual mics.
They do that, I'm sure.
And we have a system that only costs a few $100s. Their systems cost thousands of dollars. And they can alter the sound of someone very easily with if you see a mixer, you see this huge thing out here that has all of these knobs and dials and everything else. We have a small one back there in our sound room. With a large one, you can literally change the sound of someone, what they sound like. You can adjust the volumes of those individually so that you can, even as we can adjust the volume. When someone who is a loudmouth like me is speaking, then you can adjust the volume down, but yet have a different microphone of someone who is speaking softly, and you adjust it up. I'll give an illustration. When Andrew leads a prayer and he's using this microphone, I'm usually the one back there controlling that, and as a result, his volume, or when he starts to speak, the volume will be turned up so that people in here can hear him, because he speaks softly anyway, and you can't hear him otherwise. We do turn the microphone. Well, there's trying to explain the system that we have. Because we broadcast live on the internet, we do not turn it off in that sense. We turn the speakers off in the auditorium when he is leading singing, so that it does not project in here, but yet it still goes out over the internet. So we have to keep it on for that standpoint, even though it is not kept on as far as the auditorium. We have the ability with even the small mixer that we have to split it up in that way. And in reality, we have ways to split it up a whole lot more than that, and I don't even know all the ways that we could.
Could it not be that the microphone on the workshop or there or somewhere could be turned toward the audience, so when it's through on somebody's computer that it sounds like we've got singing beside
We have tried to, in fact, what we are now doing in order to try to help that is the microphone that's on the pulpit, which is a very good microphone. It picks up very well. In fact, if you remember during the debate one night, Hogler Neubauer's microphone that they were wearing, the lapel microphones, was not turned on for some reason. And we used that microphone, and probably you could not, if you go back and listen to it, you would never know the difference. But as a result, we turned that one on, and we only use this one. But it's directed toward Paul, even though it is an omnidirectional microphone. The problem with doing that is turning it around all of the time, and you're going to, half the time someone's going to forget, and then when prayers are led, just like half the time I forget to turn this one on after class. And Andrew's not, he doesn't stand up and say, "Stop, turn the microphone on," or something like that. So yeah, that he does that too in order to help, and it's still yeah, put you in the baptistry. And are there things that could be done? Yes, but doing them would involve a whole lot more work and more microphones and things like that. So we make do this way. And from the reports that I've received, doing it the way we're doing it right now has helped.
The song leader sings real soft, the congregation takes over. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
So they told me when I was just 7 or 8 years old, sing out.
That's
What I've been doing for the last 40 years.
that is a very accurate statement. If you will watch someone who does not really know what they're doing, leading, singing, the congregation will take over, and the congregation always slows down the tempo. I will guarantee you, they will slow it down. Except for Dale, and he's going to try and he'll start a note about 2 notes before it's supposed to be sung. But otherwise, the congregation will slow it down. Someone who doesn't know what they're doing as far as pitching a song will always pitch it low. And those who try and sing bass, they almost forget it because you can't get to it. It's almost impossible to hit some of the low notes and for bass when they pitch it low like that. There's a reason that a song is pitched where it is written, and why they put it where they are written, and that is so that the sopranos can hit the notes and the basses can hit the sopranos can hit the high notes, basses can hit the low notes. And when you alter that either way, then you're going to run into problems with one or the other.
be very thankful when God
Well, that's the other aspect. God never required that we sing well, but that we sing. And by the way, if somebody wants to complain about how loud Paul sings, if everybody sang just as loud as he would, nobody would hear him. Drown him out sometime. That's the solution to it. But that's the not possible. Well, say if a lot of people simply won't sing out. That's the problem. And when you have people who are not singing out, then one person's going to be heard over others. I can remember throughout the years, one person maybe within a congregation is singing out in such a way that they drown out everyone else because everyone else isn't singing out. So a lot of people sing like this, like they don't really want to, and they don't really care about it. And
while we're on this subject, a lot of the men, when they get up in the front of that microphone, it's like they're afraid to open their mouth too, and we can't hear them back here even though they're in front of the microphone.
when I try and teach people as far as speaking up here, ignore the microphone and speak as if it's not there, and try and talk to the person in the back of the auditorium. And that will help a great deal. And yes, it is. There's a thing called stage fright, and it is very real. Anyone who hasn't gotten up in front of an audience doesn't know what it's like. But this gives you the origin, really, as far as worship actions are concerned, of mechanical instruments music. It was to drown out the cries of the children as they were being sacrificed on an altar. Make it where the parents and all of the others could not hear their cries. But as you go on in verse 11 or verse 12, when it says, "But they regard not the work of the Lord, nor consider the operation of his hands," they were too busy partying that they did not have time to contemplate God and the things of a spiritual matter, what God has done. We see this a lot with young people today, maybe not as much in our city here, but if you go to big cities, the young people go into the parties and party all night, drinking, dancing, and so forth. And then they sleep during the day, getting ready to party again at night. And that's their entire life. They do not spend the time to contemplate God. Could ask them about God, they're going to blow it off. Why? Because they're too busy partying. But there's another aspect. How many people today, and this is all over, not just young people, that are so busy running here and there and to and fro and doing this and doing that, that they don't have time to think about what God has done. I think it's in the 4th Psalm, I would have to go back and look, that talks about being still and knowing that I'm God. People today, as we see people living their lives today, do not know how to be still. They've got to be doing something. And you try and get them to slow down, to stop and do, just to be still and think about, no, that drives them nuts, because they've got to be doing something is within their mind. Meditation is something really a little bit different. Meditation, from a biblical standpoint, is that you study God's Word, and then you it's an aspect of contemplation, but you contemplate what you have studied. Think about it. And that's how you come to a lot. Well, I'll use an illustration of an old gospel preacher. Years ago, he was well known, and for the life of me right now, I can't think who it was, but he was also a farmer. And what he did as he was farming, he would plow a row. At the end of that row, he'd get his Bible, read the verse, and then plow the rest of who? Gus Nichols?
He would read, he would learn how to quote the Bible that way. He'd start at a row. I heard that story before.
Brother Nichols got up about 4 o'clock in the morning to study for 3 hours or something like that, but I didn't know.
Maybe it was Roy Wallace, but I thought it was
that name and that story don't go together for some reason. It might be, but it wasn't to memorize. He would think about it. He would contemplate and think about what he had read, get to the end, go to the next verse. And so that's that's meditation. You've looked, you've studied the scripture, and then you're thinking about what it says, making applications and how it applies, and all of those type of things. Yeah, I think it goes back into that time frame, maybe, from the story that I heard. But just being still, and in that sense, meditating, yes, upon God, the creation. Think about, for example, Psalm 19:1. Heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament showeth his handiwork. You ever just stop and look at the creation and what God has created and how that applies in that type of a situation? Or are we too busy to do that? See, that's what I'm talking about there. We've gotten so busy that we can't stop and think about God. And that's what he's talking about here. They regard not the work of the Lord. They don't consider the operation of his hands. They've forgotten God because they've stopped thinking about him. They're so busy doing these other things. And in this case, yes, it's partying and drinking. Okay, Dale. All right. Dale.
I have noticed the last 10 to 12 years, people have turned smartphones and the other pads, what do you call them, into idols. I mean, you can't even get them to intelligently converse with the person that's communicating with them. They've often like that's the real, when you hear him, whatever planet they're thinking about. You know? Wow, man.
It's not the result of electronics. The electronics exemplify what is already there. But
I've always seen, not always, been fishing with Bill Klein. Be sitting in the boat, and all of a sudden you grab a pen and pencil, write something down.
mhm.
What are you doing? He said, did you see that squirrel or something? Like that? He said, I was just thinking about something. He was building a lesson for the next Sunday.
Yeah.
But he was always thinking stuff like that.
One of my problems with PowerPoint, using them a lot of times, is that between the time that I create the PowerPoint, usually on Saturdays if I do it, and the time that I use it on Sunday, I might think of something else. Because, and a lot of times it's in the shower. Because my mind is working on those things. My problem then is I forget them before I'm able to write them down, or I was taught when I was in college that you should always keep a piece of paper and pencil or pen by your bed, because some of your best thoughts are going to be during the middle of the night. And I can attest to that. I never did do it, and I have forgotten a lot of those great points that I had thought of during the middle of the night because I didn't write them down. But that, you heard, a lot of people have said that through the years. I just remember in college that was one of the points that was being made, and as far as a preacher, you need to do that. Because your mind is thinking. That's contemplation, that's meditation. But something we've gotten away from. Okay. Joyce.
When you talked about changing remembering something else in between, it reminded me of hearing Mother say that when we were up in Tennessee, of course I was pretty young then, but a lot of times Daddy would preach, on Sunday at home, we'd go out to a country congregation, didn't have a preacher, maybe have their service in the afternoon, and Mother would type out his outline, and he'd preach it Sunday morning. And then I've heard her say that he preached the same outline Sunday afternoon, different sermon.
Oh, yeah. I could preach the same sermon generally 2 weeks in a row, and even though the points would be the same, a lot of it would be different. And a lot of times I've said a lot of people would never know that it's the same sermon. Some would, but a lot wouldn't. I remember my dad talking about getting telephone calls, and people, a lot of times they ask, well, what you doing? Are you busy? Or something like that. And he never told them a lot of times what he was doing.
He was busy, I guarantee.
He was meditating. Now then, try and explain that on the phone to somebody who's called you. Well, I was sitting here meditating. Huh? Well, that is something that's important, but yet it doesn't sound right, does it? But that's what he's getting at here. These people were so busy that they didn't have time to think about God. So verse 13. Yeah, that was 12. So verse 13. Therefore my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Well, maybe we can get to it. No, okay. We're not going to be able to go past verse 13 tonight, so. The result of this, therefore, if you find a therefore, or wherefore, or thus, any words like unto that, you look what it is said, because this is a conclusion. What has it said? Here's people who were partying and drinking and music with their parties to such an extent that they didn't have time to think about God. What's the result? They've gone into captivity. Notice, and I mentioned this before, but this is a prophetic perfect. It is being stated as if it has already taken place, because that's what's going to happen. It is so sure that it is going to happen that it is being written as a historic fact. Now then, we read it as something that is historical. It did happen, but when this is being given, it was still in the future. But it was so sure that he writes it as a historical aspect. Thus, my people are gone into captivity. That's what has already taken place, but yet it's still in the future. Dale?
So this could be train reference with Isaiah 44:28, 45:1, wouldn't it? Because Cyrus was named after it already.
There are numerous historic or prophetic perfects in Isaiah and all of the prophets, really. It happens over and over and over. Here, they're going to go into captivity at the hands of the Babylonians, is the one that's going to be overtaking them. The reason, because he's giving the reason now that they have gone into captivity, even though it's yet future, is because they have no knowledge. Somebody will remember what Hosea chapter 4 and verse 6 says. Okay, that's the first part of it. My people are destroyed or perish because of lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no people unto me. So they had rejected knowledge. How? Well, go back to the previous couple of verses and you'll find out how. That's what he's saying here. They have no knowledge. Why? Because they spent so much time with these drinking and partying and music that they don't have time to contemplate God, and so they have no knowledge of God. Now then, again, look at our nation today. It has no knowledge of God. Why? Same thing. And they like it that way. That's true. Evolution, for example, has never been based upon research and fact. It is promoted as fact because people do not want to be held to the restrictions, and particularly the sexual restrictions that God places within the Bible. Now, that is fact. That is the reason the people promoted the doctrine of evolution. And if you look at the school system, Karen's been working in the school system for several years now. How'd she get involved in it or get into the school system? Anyone know? As a babysitter, because the schools had to provide babysitting services for the young girls who had gotten pregnant and had babies. It wasn't the teachers that they were babysitting. It was the kids in school, their babies. Now that's how she got into the school system. But once in, she's moved from that, but that's the way in which it started. Now that says a lot about the school. Now why do you get that? Well, it goes back to because they drove God out of the classroom. And taught this idea of evolution. They did not. Once you take God out of the equation and the Bible out of the equation, then you see any and every type of sexual perversion that's imaginable. And it becomes normal. When people had a healthy respect for the Bible, what was homosexuality? It was a perversion. It was a shame. In fact, it was listed in the psychological books as being a psychological or illness, mental illness. They removed that. And now then, it is accepted as an alternate lifestyle. Let me give you a prediction. And I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, using the language of Amos. But I'll give you a prediction that before too long, unless something happens, that pedophilia will be just like homosexuality. If you're familiar with MAMBLA, some of you look like deer in the headlights. Man-Boy Love Association. They promote in pedophilia. Every argument that the homosexual makes, the pedophiles will make. And if you end up accepting homosexuality, the same arguments will force you to accept pedophilia. And then, of course, we have the bestiality. And then we're even saying, I don't even think they've got a name for it, where inanimate objects, trees and such. You had a situation where I think it was man married a tree. Now then, why all of that? Because God's been taken out of the picture. Well, that's what was taking place in Israel. It wasn't to that perversion that we've seen it within our society, but you have the same thing. He talks about their honorable men are famished. Well, famished from the lack of spiritual food. And that's going to be the lot of both the nobles and the people. I wish I had saved a tweet that I saw the other day. and written it down, because the percentages. As far as in our colleges, those percentage-wise who considered themselves Republicans, the percentage-wise, guess how many? 12? No. Much lower. Much lower than 8. Much lower than 2. 0. Identified themselves as being Republicans. Now then, if that is the situation, and pretty much if you look at and this is dealing with universities and colleges, it wasn't dealing with the grade schools. But if that's the lot of the higher education, then you're only going to get one side. And I'm not trying to get into a debate between Democrats and Republicans. I'm just saying you're only getting one side. It has long been known that the liberals, and whether you're dealing from a religious standpoint or a political standpoint, liberalism goes after the educational departments. And eventually, they thus win the battle.
They have to change the mindset of their students.
Well, they do change the mindset of the students. And as a result, the next generation comes up, and they're going to be much more liberal than the previous generation. The situation then becomes that while what was mainstream at one time years ago is now far right, and what is now mainstream is what was far out liberalism years ago. Consider the church. You go back 50 years ago, 60 years ago in the church. What was mainstream then, well, today is considered radical, backwards. What was 50 years ago considered as radical liberalism is basically your norm now. And that is what's considered as being mainstream.
That's part of that historical lack of knowledge.
Well, it is lack of, because they have no knowledge. And this, well, let me get this aspect. The drinking and the partying that he's mentioned in these verses has turned into a famine. But it is a spiritual famine. Their multitude dried up with thirst. But it began with notice, the honorable men, those who are high up, and then it affected the populace.
I've heard some, I don't know if it's a rumor or what, that they're now in some of the quote Christian colleges, they're allowing alcoholic beverages to be consumed.
It's gone far beyond that of alcohol. And I don't have the documentation, so I won't say the school that has accepted homosexuality. A Christian college among our brethren. We'll start with verse 14 next week.